Hey, this is Andrew Brown from ExamPro, and we are taking a look at Azure Queue Storage, which is a simple message queue that allows you to exchange cloud messages. It's used for application integration between services, and it allows that via an authenticated HTTPS endpoint or protocol, and it can accept messages of 64 kilobytes in size. So the queue storage is a service or a product underneath the Azure storage account. So you first have to create a storage account, and then from there you create your queue, but you'll be using the same access keys and connection strings like the rest of the other storage account resources. There are 3 ways of handling messages for Azure Storage, Azure Queue Storage. The first is peek, and as it says, it will retrieve or look at a message in the queue without removing or locking it. You have delete, so that will delete a message that is being processed, and receive, so that is a message in the front of the queue, but it gets locked temporarily while it is being used. Okay, and just to kind of give you a visual of how simple it is to use this queue, you can, in the UI, in the Azure portal, you can open it up, write a message, set an expiry, and just say, okay. But the way you're generally going to be using it is not through the UI, because these are for application integration. That means you're going to be writing either SDK code or utilizing the CLI. And I believe that Azure Queue Storage is one of the ones where you can actually use CLI. We do cover that as the difference between the other queuing service that you can use in Azure. But here's an example of the Azure SDK. It's a Python example. So just getting my pen tool out here. It is a bit brief, but the idea is that we have our queue client. We have our connection string URL, which we're getting from our storage account. We're putting the name of the queue, and then we just send a message. So it's that simple, and that is a Python example. Let's just talk about some of the components within a queue. There's not a lot here, so it's not too complicated, but the idea is you have a queue. This could be accessed by using a URL format of the following. So you'll have your storage account here, queue core windows.net, and then the queue name. Would this show up in the exam? Probably not, but it's generally good to know just in case, because Azure exams are very tricky. And then we have also this URL here as an example. So I think it's reflecting the example on the right-hand side here. So the idea here is that we have my account. So this is my account. And then we have images to download. So images to download would be one particular queue. Okay, so just to kind of hit home that URL there. We have a storage account, so this is required in order for us to make a queue. As we mentioned, you have the queue itself. This contains a set of messages. The queue names must be in all lowercase. That's just one of those interesting use cases or edge cases. Messages can be up to 64 kilobytes in format, so it's very small. So this is where you might want to use the other queuing service. Within Azure, which I can't remember, but we do cover it when we get to that section. And there is some versioning that's a bit different. So if you're using before 2017, the TTL on it is a max of 7 days. If you're using after 2017, it can be any positive number or -1, indicating that they don't expire. And it doesn't say, I guess it can be whatever number you want to be. I don't know what the maximum is, but I mean, what's important to know is that the old one gives you 7 days. So you're going to be wanting to use the latest version to have the most flexibility. The default time to live is 7 days if the parameter is not specified, which is totally fine. Let's take a look at some of the CLI commands because, when I'm making this course, it's specifically for the AZ204, which means developer. So you're getting lots of hands-on stuff. So you should really know these CLI commands. We do cover them in the follow-along here. But the idea is we have the AZ storage, because we're using storage count, message, action. So that's going to be automatically for the queue. So we have clear, so delete all messages from the specified queue. Delete, so delete a specific message. Get, so retrieve one or more messages from the front of the queue. Peek, so retrieve one or more messages from the front of the queue, but do not remove them, do not change their visibility, do not lock them. Put, so add new messages to the back of the message queue. Update, updates the visibility timeout of a message. So these systems are very, very, very simple, but they're also highly scalable, which is really great. Yeah, there you go.
Hey, Brian here from ExamPro. Sorry for interrupting your learning. Just wanted to quickly ask you if you're enjoying the content or learning something, if you could just give a little poke to that like button. Really helps out the YouTube algorithm so that we can keep on making more of these videos. So anyway, go ahead and get back to learning.
In this follow along, we're going to learn all about storage queues. So what I want you to do is log into the Azure portal, and at the top here, type in queue. And so that's going to show you, it's going to bring you to storage accounts because it is not a separate service. It's underneath storage accounts. So what we'll do here is we'll create ourselves a new storage account. So we'll hit new or create there. Give it a moment to load, and we're going to create ourselves a new namespace. I'm going to call this one AZ204. AZ204 Azure Storage account. Actually, we'll just say storage account queuing, or queue. We'll say OK. There, this will be called AZ204 storage account queue. And it doesn't like the hyphens, maybe. There we go. And we'll let it launch in whatever region it wants to. Here it's going to be East US. For performance, we'll stick with standard. We'll stick with redundancy of geo-redundant storage. It's not going to matter for those options for using the queue. We'll go to advanced to see if there's anything interesting there. Nothing in particular. I was just checking if there's anything for the queue. And so we'll go ahead and hit review and create. We'll scroll on down and hit create, and we'll give that a moment to create. So in order to utilize the queue, there isn't much in the UI that we can do in the portal. And so we are going to need to utilize the Azure CLI. So, there's a few ways we can go about this. We could launch up Visual Studio Code, but since it's all CLI driven, what I'm going to do is go ahead and actually open up Cloud Shell, and that's the way we're going to interact with it. Now, if this is your first time spinning up Cloud Shell, it might ask you to create a storage account, and so just let it do that. And now this resource is complete. We'll click into here, and on the left-hand side, we're going to make our way over to queues. And I'm going to create a new queue. I'm going to call that my queue, and we'll hit OK. So for this, there wasn't really a follow along in the Microsoft documents, so I just kind of made my own. And so for that information, I have a repository, and you'll find this throughout the course, which is called, I'm just looking it up here on the side here, the Developer Associate. So some of these are reworkings of Microsoft ones, or they're my own creations. So this one in particular, which is Azure Storage Queue, is a bit more unique. And so the things that we're going to need to do is you're going to need to have a connection string in order for us via the CLI to connect it, because all the commands we're using, like put, peek, get, all these things are going to rely on it. In terms of what we want to run, I'm going to type in Azure queue message CLI, because this is mostly what you'll want to know how to use, is how to interact with messages. There's a bunch of different CLI commands for Azure Storage, like working with the queue and stuff like that, but I'd rather just work with messages because that's the only part that we can't do here, and that's where we need to understand the difference between peek, get, put, and things like that. So the first thing we'll do is get a connection string URL, and I believe that is for the queue. So we'll go into queue here, click into the queue, because sometimes it is the access key that is at the storage account level, and sometimes, like if you go here, sometimes it is, see, there's keys here, sometimes it's the queue. So I think it is the queue key that we want, and if it isn't, we'll find out very shortly here if we've made a mistake. So what we'll do is we'll go back to our resources here, we'll click into the queue, and in the queue again, and we'll look at access policies. And so we can add a policy here. Nope, you know what it was? It absolutely is the storage account that we need. So if we go down here and we type in access, and we have access keys. So here it is. And between different Azure services, sometimes this is called access keys, and sometimes it's called something else. We're going to discover that as we do other follow-alongs. Just understand that this is not always consistent based on the UI, but what we need is a connection string. So we'll click show up here, and what we'll do is grab this string. And so what I want to do is type in export queue connection string equals, and then double quotations. Very important that you put those double quotations, because if you don't, this equals will terminate here, and it will only think this is a part that is set here. So I'm going to hit enter, and so that's going to set us an environment variable for this. So if I did env -grep and put in this. This is how we can check if it was set correctly. Okay, if you've never done this, if you type in env, that shows all of your environment variables. And so all grep is doing is saying, find the one that's called this. I could even do it like this, right, partially, and it would return it here. So that's one thing. The next thing is we need the queue name. So we named it, I believe, my queue. So if we go back to our storage accounts here, and let's just click back onto here. Such a pain sometimes clicking around here. We'll go to queues, and we named it my queue. So I'm going to set export queue name equals, and we don't need double quotations here, but I'm going to do it anyway. My queue. We'll make sure that is set correctly. So we'll type in grep queue name, and there it is. So some of the first commands we will want to use is things like put, because put will allow us to enter stuff in. So we said that there are these messages here, so we'll go to the put command here. You can see there's a lot of options. When you want to know what you need to put in, all I do is just copy the base thing and paste it in, and then it'll just tell us. So we'll just give it a moment here. And so it complains. It says we need the queue name, we need the content, and I already know that we need the connection string URL, even though it's not saying it there, because it might say, hey, you need, actually down here it says connection string, account name, things like that. So just to make this easier, I'm going to go open editor here, and this is a terrible, terrible editor, but when we're working with like just some text here, it makes our lives a little bit easier. So what I want to do is just type it up here before we paste it in. And of course, this is all in the repository, but I'm just doing it by hand, and I recommend that you do it by hand like I'm doing, so that you have a better chance of committing to memory. So we type in Azure storage message put. I'm going to do a backslash so we can do multi-line here. We're going to do connection string equals, and we set that as an environment variable called queue connection string. When we do this $, that allows us to access the environment variable that we said earlier. And we do that is because we have to run a series of commands, and it was just a lot easier to pass this in consistently as opposed to passing in that raw string every time. So we need to provide the queue name. So this would be queue underscore name. And then we need to provide it content. So we'll say hyphen hyphen content equals, and I'm going to say hello world. And so we will copy the contents there. I'm going to just type clear here so I can see what I'm doing. We'll go ahead and paste that on in there. We'll hit enter. And yeah, so it is now in the queue. Now, one thing that I was not able to figure out was how do you observe how many questions are in the queue? I'm not exactly sure. So if we go into here, I'm not sure if we get any statistics. Oh, well, we have a message right here. So we can see there is one in the queue, but what I was trying to say is that when I was using the CLI, I was trying to find a CLI command to find that, and I just never did, but it's nice to see that we can see it visible here in the actual console here. I want to have more than one message here because I want to show you how visibility works. And so what we'll do is just paste Command V. There is no, if you notice right click, there's no paste here, which is kind of weird. And so I'm going to do here hello Mars as our second one. And we'll copy this here, copy it, paste it on below, hit enter. And so now we have two queued up. If we refresh, we can see we have two messages in our queue. We can even add a message here if we wanted to. So we could say, hello, Jupiter. And hit, maybe I have to scroll down here. Oh, no, it vanished. I got to do it again. Maybe bring it down all the way down here, add message. There we go. Hello, Jupiter. We'll say, okay. And notice that we have some options there where we can set the expires in X amount of time or whether it never expires and things like that. But anyway, what we'll do is now we should probably attempt to peek or get. So what we'll do is go back to the top here. So I think they list them out. So we have get. So retrieves one or more message from the front of the queue. And then you have peek. So retrieves one or more message from the front of the queue, but does not alter the visibility of the message. So when we say visibility, the idea is that when somebody accesses a message, they're now looking at it, right? And so nobody else can read it. And the reason why that happens is to avoid two people doing the same job by accident. But if we use peek, that means that it doesn't become invisible. it will just remain the same. So let's do peak first. And so what we'll do is we'll just copy this here and paste this in. Oh, we have to do Control V there. And we'll just get rid of the content line because we don't need to pass content. We still need the queue. We still need the connection string. And I'm going to change this to peak. And so what peak should do is it should return us what's on the front of the queue. So this is the top up here. We'll go ahead and copy it. Then we'll right click and paste down below. We'll hit enter. And so we get hello world. If we were to hit up and run it again, we would still get hello world because it has not been marked as invisible, right? It's still visible. So now let's go ahead and change this to get. Oh, we got to paste. Control V. So we do get here. And copy, Control C or Command C, depending on what you're using. And we'll paste that in there and hit enter. And so now it says hello world as it did before. Both times we ran hello world, it was always returning the same one. Okay, notice it says DQ count is 1. So we'll go here and refresh. And notice that hello world is not appearing now. Right? So it's because it's not visible. It's still there, it's just not visible, right? And so the next thing we can do is if we hit enter again, now it types in hello Mars. Okay? And the next thing we can do here is clear the queue if we want. So that's probably something that we should do. So if we were to go here and copy this, type in clear. And hit enter. That should clear the entire queue. So hopefully that gives you an idea of how the queuing system works. Of course, you can use the SDK. So like if we were to type in Azure Storage Queue Documentation. And we were to go to tutorials, there's probably, or samples, there's probably like examples. I always go to JavaScript because it's the easiest one to read. And if we go down to messages here, send a message. Not really great that they don't have this inline, but the way it works is you probably import the library at the top. So you'd install with npm install Azure Storage Queue. You have the client, the credentials, and then down below here, you're creating your message. I guess you have to create the client queue first up here. And then you pass along your message sent, and then it says whether it's been sent or not. Here you can see that they're using peak, right? Very similar. Receive message, all very similar here. So hopefully that gives you kind of an idea. I think like for get, or sorry, like notice like it's called receive message as opposed to get. So in the CLI, we did get, but this is really receive, right? So just so that translates over. These queues are extremely simple, but they're designed to be extremely simple. When we look at Service Bus, you'll see that it's a lot more complex. But one of the key differences, at least pragmatically with Service Bus and Storage Queue, is that Service Bus allows you to use the CLI to insert messages, where when we do Service Bus, we have to write code using the SDK, and we will do that. But yeah, that's all there is really to this one that I want to show you. What we'll do is make our way over to our resource groups. I'm going to just close off our shell here. We're going to look for the one we just created here. So this is Azure Storage Account Queue. We'll go ahead and delete that. Delete. And it should all be good. Of course, always double check. 5 minutes from now, make sure that stuff is deleted, because Azure is notorious for sometimes not deleting things, or you think that things are being deleted, but this won't show up immediately. It'll take some time to propagate through their servers, but there you go.
Hey, Brian here again from ExamPro. Thank you for watching the video. Much appreciated. If it really helped you out, then don't forget to like, and if you want to keep learning, then go ahead and subscribe, and we're going to have all sorts of cool cloud content. If you're prepping for certifications or exams, or just want to learn more in a more structured way, you can go to exampro.co, and you get to see all sorts of awesome content there, including you get flashcards and quizzes and all sorts of great stuff. You could become a real professional on there. So go ahead, hop over there if you need to, or you can watch some of these videos that are popping up. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you soon.